You understand what we're discussing, don't you? The man in seat 2A had caught Elena Vasquez listening to their conversation, and his voice carried the quiet menace of someone accustomed to violence. Former State Department, Diplomatic Security Division, he continued, with a slight accent. Elena Vasquez, the question is, will you pretend you heard nothing, or do we have a problem at 35,000 feet? What happened next at cruising altitude would determine whether a historic nuclear disarmament treaty would succeed or fail, and whether Elena would live to see the plane land in New Delhi. Elena Vasquez hadn't always been a flight attendant. For 12 years, she'd been one of the State Department's most skilled diplomatic security specialists, responsible for protecting high-level negotiations and preventing international incidents that could destabilize global peace. Her specialty was threat assessment in diplomatic environments, the ability to identify potential security risks during sensitive negotiations, spot foreign intelligence operatives, and neutralize threats before they could compromise critical international agreements. Elena had protected Nobel Peace Prize winners, secured nuclear non-proliferation talks, and helped orchestrate the delicate security arrangements for treaties that kept hostile nations from destroying each other. She spoke 6 languages fluently and understood the cultural nuances that could make or break diplomatic relationships. Her most significant assignment had been Operation Harmony, the security detail for the historic Mumbai Nuclear Disarmament Summit, where 12 nuclear-armed nations were negotiating the most comprehensive weapons reduction treaty in human history. The agreement would eliminate 80% of the world's nuclear arsenal over 10 years, potentially saving humanity from the threat of nuclear war. But 3 days before the summit, Elena had identified what she believed was a serious security threat. Dr. Rashid Khan, a Pakistani nuclear physicist who was supposed to be advising his government's delegation. Elena's intelligence analysis suggested that Dr. Khan had been compromised by foreign operatives and might be planning to sabotage the negotiations. Elena had recommended that Dr. Khan be removed from the delegation and subjected to enhanced security screening. Her assessment was detailed, professional, and based on solid intelligence indicators that should have been taken seriously. Instead, her superiors dismissed her concerns as cultural bias and diplomatic overreach. Dr. Khan was a respected scientist, they argued, and removing him would be an insult to Pakistan that could derail the entire summit. Elena was ordered to stand down and let the diplomatic process proceed without interference. She refused. Acting on her own authority, Elena had Dr. Khan detained for security questioning just hours before the summit was scheduled to begin. The incident created a major diplomatic crisis, with Pakistan threatening to withdraw from the negotiations and other delegations questioning American commitment to respectful partnership. The Mumbai Nuclear Disarmament Summit collapsed before it could begin, setting back nuclear reduction efforts by a decade and leaving Elena's career in ruins. You followed your instincts instead of your orders, her supervisor had explained during her dismissal hearing. In diplomacy, following orders is more important than being right. 6 months later, Elena found herself applying for a job as an international flight attendant, her diplomatic security clearance revoked, her career destroyed, and her faith in the system shattered. But time would prove that Elena had been right about Dr. Khan. 2 years after the Mumbai summit collapse, he was arrested by Interpol for selling nuclear secrets to hostile foreign governments. The very intelligence Elena had tried to prevent had been compromised exactly as she'd predicted. By then, however, it was too late to salvage her career or the historic opportunity for nuclear disarmament that had been lost. Working as a flight attendant for International Airways hadn't been Elena's first choice, but it turned out to suit her skills perfectly. International flights carried diplomats, business leaders, government officials, and other influential passengers who spoke freely around cabin crew, assuming they were invisible service providers. Elena's linguistic abilities made her valuable for international routes, and her diplomatic training helped her handle difficult passengers with the calm professionalism that made her one of the airline's most requested senior crew members. Flying the London to New Delhi route twice a week, Elena had served meals to UN ambassadors, Middle Eastern oil ministers, European defense contractors, and Asian technology moguls. She'd learned to be invisible while remaining alert, to provide excellent service while gathering information that might have strategic importance. Not that she was actively spying. Elena told herself she was done with intelligence work, done with the stress of trying to prevent international disasters, done with the impossible burden of knowing that her decisions could affect millions of lives. But old habits die hard, and when you've spent 12 years listening for lies, recognizing patterns, and spotting threats, you can't simply turn those skills off. Especially when the passengers in first class are discussing plans to sabotage the very nuclear disarmament treaty that Elena had once risked her career to protect. Flight 447 from London to New Delhi was carrying an unusually high number of passengers traveling to the Nuclear Security Conference, a follow-up summit designed to restart the disarmament negotiations that had collapsed in Mumbai 3 years earlier. Elena had noticed the passenger manifest during her pre-flight briefing. Several delegates, arms control experts, and what appeared to be security consultants, all heading to New Delhi for what many considered humanity's second chance at comprehensive nuclear disarmament. The three men in first class had boarded separately but gravitated toward each other once the flight reached cruising altitude. Elena's diplomatic security training had automatically cataloged their behavior. The way they checked for surveillance before speaking, their use of coded language, their careful positioning to avoid being overheard by other passengers. What caught Elena's attention initially was their accents, a combination of Eastern European, Middle Eastern, and what sounded like Pakistani English. In her State Department days, Elena had learned to identify the linguistic markers that indicated foreign intelligence operatives working together despite representing different nations. But it was their conversation that made Elena's blood run cold. The Mumbai operation failed because the asset was exposed too early, the man in seat 2A was saying in carefully modulated tones. This time, the sabotage must occur during the actual negotiations when maximum damage can be achieved. The new protocols are more sophisticated, replied the passenger in 2B, whose accent suggested advanced education in British institutions. Dr. Khan's replacement has been much more careful about operational security. Elena's heart stopped. Dr. Khan, the Pakistani nuclear physicist she'd tried to remove from the Mumbai summit, whose subsequent arrest had vindicated her security concerns, too late to matter. They were discussing a new operation to sabotage the nuclear security conference, and they were using the same methods that had nearly succeeded in Mumbai. The technical specifications are confirmed, the third man added, his voice barely audible above the aircraft engines. Nuclear facility locations, security protocols, delegation schedules, everything needed to ensure the negotiations fail catastrophically. Elena realized she was overhearing the final coordination meeting for an operation designed to destroy humanity's last best hope for nuclear disarmament, and the man in seat 2A had just recognized her. Elena Vasquez, the man continued, his slight accent now clearly identifiable as Serbian. Diplomatic Security Service, Mumbai Nuclear Summit Security Detail. The woman who nearly exposed Dr. Khan's operation before it could succeed. Elena's mind raced through her options. At 35,000 feet, with nowhere to run and no backup, she was facing 3 foreign operatives who had just revealed their knowledge of a conspiracy that could affect global security. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Elena replied calmly, falling back on the diplomatic training that had taught her to remain composed under pressure. "I'm just here to ensure your flight is comfortable." Ms. Vasquez, the man in 2B, interjected with the precise diction of someone accustomed to academic lectures. "We know exactly who you are and why your career ended in disgrace. The question is whether you've learned from that experience." The third man leaned forward slightly, and Elena caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Some people learn to mind their own business after their lives are destroyed by misguided heroism," he said quietly. "Others require additional education." Elena found herself in the same impossible position that had ended her diplomatic career. follow protocol, and ignore a threat to international security, or take action that would put her own life at risk. But this time, there was no backup, no chain of command to follow or ignore, and no bureaucratic process to navigate. There was just Elena, 3 dangerous men, and the knowledge that millions of lives might depend on what happened in the next few hours. "Gentlemen," Elena said, maintaining her professional flight attendant demeanor, "can I offer you anything to drink? We'll be beginning our descent into New Delhi in approximately 4 hours. The man in 2A smiled coldly. "I think we understand each other perfectly, Ms. Vasquez. You serve coffee, we conduct our business, and everyone arrives safely at their destination." But Elena was already formulating a plan that would test every skill she'd learned in 12 years of diplomatic security work. Elena's advantage was that the conspirators believed she'd been neutralized by fear and the memory of her career destruction. They returned to their conversation, speaking more freely now that they thought she was simply serving drinks and avoiding involvement. Over the next 2 hours, Elena used her service duties to gather intelligence with the systematic approach that had once made her one of the State Department's most effective security specialists. Moving through the cabin with coffee service, Elena was able to overhear additional details. The operation was called Broken Arrow, designed to create a false flag incident during the nuclear security conference that would be blamed on Pakistani extremists, justifying military action that would destabilize the entire region. The plan involved infiltrating the conference security, planting evidence of a planned nuclear theft, and triggering an international crisis that would destroy trust between the participating nations. The resulting chaos would end nuclear disarmament efforts for another generation while providing cover for illegal arms sales worth billions of dollars. Elena realized this wasn't just about sabotaging a treaty. It was about creating a permanent state of nuclear tension that would benefit arms dealers, defense contractors, and nations that profited from global instability. She also learned something that chilled her to the bone. The operation had been planned specifically to prevent the kind of security intervention that Elena had attempted in Mumbai. They'd studied her methods, learned from Dr. Khan's exposure, and designed their current plan to be resistant to exactly the kind of analysis that had once been Elena's specialty. They weren't just sabotaging the conference. They were neutralizing the people who might be able to stop them. During her normal service duties, Elena was able to identify each conspirator more precisely. Alexander Petrov, a former Serbian intelligence officer now working as a private contractor. Dr. Hamid Rashid, a Pakistani nuclear scientist who had replaced Dr. Khan after his arrest. And Viktor Kozlov, a Russian arms dealer with connections to several hostile governments. Together, they represented a sophisticated international conspiracy with the resources and expertise to carry out exactly the kind of operation they were describing. Elena faced the same moral choice that had destroyed her career 3 years earlier: follow safe protocol and hope someone else would handle the threat, or take personal action that would put her own life at risk. But this time, Elena had learned something important from her Mumbai failure. She couldn't rely on official channels or bureaucratic processes to prevent an international disaster. If she was going to stop Operation Broken Arrow, she would have to do it herself. Elena's plan was audacious and dangerous. She would use the aircraft's communication systems to alert Indian security forces about the conspiracy, providing enough detail to allow them to prepare appropriate countermeasures for the nuclear security conference. The challenge was that any obvious attempt to communicate with authorities would be detected by the conspirators, who were watching her carefully and had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence. Elena needed to send a detailed intelligence report without alerting the 3 men that she was doing anything more than performing routine flight duties. Her solution drew on both her diplomatic training and her airline experience. She would use the passenger service system to send what appeared to be routine flight updates, but coded with intelligence information that Indian security services would be able to decrypt. During her State Department career, Elena had learned several emergency communication protocols designed for exactly this type of situation, methods for transmitting critical intelligence when normal channels had been compromised. The code she chose was one she'd memorized, but never thought she'd need to use. A system for embedding security warnings in routine diplomatic communications. Working during normal service activities, Elena began transmitting her intelligence report through the aircraft's passenger service network, disguising crucial information about Operation Broken Arrow as routine flight status updates and passenger service requests. To any casual observer, including the three conspirators, Elena was simply performing her normal duties, checking passenger comfort, coordinating with ground services, and preparing for arrival in New Delhi. In reality, she was providing Indian intelligence services with detailed information about a conspiracy that could destabilize global security and destroy humanity's best hope for nuclear disarmament. Elena's coded messages were received by Indian aviation authorities and immediately forwarded to the Research and Analysis Wing, RAW, India's external intelligence agency, which had been monitoring all communications related to the nuclear security conference. RAW analysts recognized the emergency communication protocol Elena was using and understood that they were receiving actionable intelligence from a former U.S. diplomatic security specialist. The information Elena provided was incredibly detailed: names of the conspirators, their planned methods, their intended targets, and the timeline for Operation Broken Arrow. Most importantly, she'd identified the specific vulnerabilities they planned to exploit during the nuclear security conference. Indian security forces began immediate countermeasures, coordinating with U.S., British, and Pakistani intelligence services to verify Elena's information and prepare defensive responses. What they found confirmed Elena's intelligence. Alexander Petrov had indeed entered India under false credentials, Dr. Hamid Rashid was carrying forged documents that would give him access to restricted conference areas, and Viktor Kozlov had established contact with known terrorist organizations operating in the New Delhi region. But the most critical discovery was that Operation Broken Arrow was already in motion. Equipment had been positioned, personnel were in place, and the false flag incident was scheduled to occur within hours of the nuclear security conference opening ceremony. Elena's warning had arrived just in time to prevent an international catastrophe. However, there was one complication that Elena hadn't anticipated. The conspirators had a communication system of their own, and they'd just learned that their operation had been compromised. With 1 hour remaining until landing in New Delhi, Alexander Petrov received a coded message on his satellite phone that made his face go white. He immediately alerted his colleagues, and Elena watched their body language change from confident to desperate. They knew their operation had been exposed, and they knew it could only have come from one source. "Ms. Vasquez," Petrov called, as Elena passed through the first-class cabin. "I think we need to have another conversation." Elena maintained her professional demeanor, but she could see that all three men were now watching her with the intensity of trained killers who'd realized their target was more dangerous than they'd anticipated. "Of course, sir. How can I assist you?" "You can start by explaining how Indian security forces knew to look for us at the airport," Dr. Rashid said quietly, his academic politeness replaced by cold menace. "You can explain how they knew our names, our methods, and our timeline." Elena realized that the conspirators had intelligence sources within Indian security services, sources that had warned them their operation was compromised and identified Elena as the leak. She was trapped at 35,000 feet with three international criminals who now knew she'd exposed their plan and had nothing left to lose. "Gentlemen, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Viktor Kozlov interrupted, standing and moving to block the aisle, "is thinking we would allow the same mistake twice. Dr. Khan was exposed and arrested because someone interfered with our operation. We won't let that happen again." Elena found herself facing the choice between personal survival and protecting the nuclear security conference. She could deny involvement, hope to survive the flight, and let the conspirators try to salvage their sabotage operation. Or she could confirm their suspicions and face the consequences of stopping them. Looking at the three men who represented everything she'd spent her career fighting against, the arms dealers, intelligence operatives, and extremists who profited from global conflict. Elena made her choice. "You're right," she said calmly. "I sent the warnings. Your operation is finished. Operation Broken Arrow is dead, and the nuclear security conference will succeed." "Not if you don't survive to testify about it," Petrov replied, his hand moving toward his concealed weapon. What happened next required every skill Elena had learned in 12 years of diplomatic security training and 15 years of handling in-flight emergencies. Elena's advantage was that the conspirators couldn't risk obvious violence on an aircraft filled with witnesses and security cameras. They needed to eliminate her quietly, without creating a disturbance that would alert other passengers or crew members. But Elena also knew that once the aircraft landed, she would be vulnerable to more direct action. If she was going to survive and ensure that the nuclear security conference proceeded safely, she needed to neutralize the threat before they reached New Delhi. Her solution was audacious. She was going to force the conspirators to reveal themselves to the entire aircraft. "Gentlemen," Elena said loudly enough to be heard by nearby passengers, "I understand you're concerned about the nuclear security conference, but threatening airline crew members is a federal crime." The statement achieved exactly what Elena intended. Other passengers began paying attention. Several people started recording with their phones, and the conspiracy of silence that had protected the three men began to unravel. Petrov realized immediately what Elena was doing, but he was trapped by the same public scrutiny that Elena was using to protect herself. "You're making a serious mistake, Ms. Vasquez," he said, trying to maintain the appearance of a normal passenger complaint while communicating a threat. "The only mistake," Elena replied clearly, "would be allowing arms dealers and foreign intelligence operatives to sabotage international peace negotiations, which is why I've already reported your conspiracy to the appropriate authorities." The cabin erupted as passengers realized they were witnessing something far more serious than a service complaint. Several people were now openly recording, others were calling for security, and the aircraft's captain was being alerted to a potential security threat. Elena had successfully transformed a secret confrontation into a public incident that the conspirators couldn't control. Dr. Rashid made a desperate move, reaching for what appeared to be a concealed weapon, but Elena was ready. Years of diplomatic security training took over as she disabled him with a precision strike that left him unconscious, but alive. Viktor Kozlov attempted to create a distraction by claiming there was a bomb on board. But Elena immediately identified this as a false flag tactic and alerted other passengers that it was a diversion. Alexander Petrov, realizing his operation was completely compromised, attempted to destroy evidence by throwing his satellite phone and documents toward the aircraft's emergency exit. But Elena intercepted the materials, preserving crucial evidence for the investigation that would follow. When Flight 447 landed in New Delhi, it was met by a joint task force of Indian, American, and Pakistani security personnel, who had been coordinating for hours, based on Elena's intelligence warnings. The three conspirators were arrested immediately, their equipment seized, and their communications analyzed to identify other members of the network they represented. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Operation Broken Arrow, a sophisticated international conspiracy involving arms dealers, foreign intelligence services, and extremist organizations, all working together to prevent nuclear disarmament and maintain the profitable conflicts that justified massive defense spending. Elena's intervention had not only prevented the sabotage of the nuclear security conference, but had also exposed a network that had been operating for years, profiting from global instability and working to ensure that nuclear weapons remained a permanent threat to human civilization. But perhaps, most importantly, the nuclear security conference proceeded as planned, ultimately producing the comprehensive disarmament treaty that had been Elena's original mission to protect. Dr. Khan's replacement was arrested and found to be carrying detailed plans for creating false evidence of nuclear theft. Viktor Kozlov's communications revealed connections to terrorist organizations that had been planning to claim responsibility for the fake incident. Alexander Petrov's documents exposed the international financing network that supported operations designed to destabilize peace negotiations. 6 months after the successful nuclear security conference, Elena Vasquez received an unexpected visitor at the London airport, where she was preparing for another international flight. "Ms. Vasquez," said Ambassador Sarah Chen, the U.S. State Department's chief negotiator for nuclear disarmament, "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did. The nuclear security treaty was signed by all 12 participating nations. We've eliminated 60% of the world's nuclear weapons in the first phase alone." "I was just doing my job," Elena replied, though they both knew it had been much more than that. "Your job as a flight attendant, perhaps. But what you did required the skills and courage of a diplomatic security specialist who put the safety of millions of people ahead of her own survival." Ambassador Chen paused, then continued, "The State Department would like to offer you a position as a senior consultant on international security threats. Your unique combination of diplomatic training and airline industry access makes you incredibly valuable for preventing exactly these kinds of conspiracies." Elena considered the offer, thinking about the career she'd lost and the new life she'd built. "Ambassador Chen, I appreciate the recognition and the offer, but I think I'm exactly where I need to be. As a flight attendant? As someone who can protect international security while helping people travel safely around the world. The most dangerous conspiracies often happen at 35,000 feet, and someone needs to be watching." Elena Vasquez continued working international flights, but now she also served as an unofficial intelligence asset for multiple governments, using her airline access to monitor threats to international security and diplomatic negotiations. Her unique position allowed her to observe and report on activities that traditional intelligence services couldn't detect: arms dealers coordinating illegal sales, foreign operatives planning sabotage operations, and extremist groups organizing attacks on diplomatic targets. The airline industry became Elena's cover for one of the most effective intelligence operations in modern history. A single agent who could move freely between nations, observe high-level conversations, and prevent international incidents before they could destabilize global peace. 3 years after Operation Broken Arrow, Elena had helped prevent 14 separate attempts to sabotage international negotiations, exposed 7 arms dealing networks, and provided intelligence that led to the arrest of dozens of foreign operatives. But her greatest achievement was something that never made headlines. The nuclear security treaty had continued to expand, with additional nations joining the disarmament process and global nuclear arsenals steadily decreasing. The world was becoming safer, one flight at a time. 5 years after the nuclear security conference, Elena was serving coffee to delegates heading to the final nuclear disarmament ceremony, the event that would mark the elimination of 95% of the world's nuclear weapons. Among her passengers was Dr. Rajesh Patel, the Pakistani nuclear scientist who had replaced both Dr. Khan and Dr. Rashid as his country's lead disarmament negotiator. "Ms. Vasquez," Dr. Patel said as Elena refilled his coffee, "I understand we have you to thank for the success of this entire process. If Operation Broken Arrow had succeeded, none of this would have been possible. Dr. Patel, the real heroes are the negotiators who did the difficult work of building trust between nations that had been enemies for generations. I just made sure they had the chance to succeed." "Sometimes," Dr. Patel replied thoughtfully, "protecting the opportunity for peace is just as important as negotiating the peace itself." As the aircraft cruised toward the final nuclear disarmament ceremony, Elena reflected on the strange path her life had taken. She'd lost her original career trying to protect a nuclear summit that failed, only to find her true calling protecting the process that ultimately succeeded. The skills that had once made her an effective diplomatic security specialist, cultural awareness, threat assessment, multilingual communication, had proven even more valuable when combined with the access and invisibility that came with being a flight attendant. Elena had learned that sometimes the most important intelligence work doesn't happen in government buildings or diplomatic meeting rooms. Sometimes it happens at 35,000 feet, when dangerous people assume that the person serving their coffee couldn't possibly understand the significance of their conversations. But Elena Vasquez understood everything, and she was watching, protecting, and ensuring that humanity's best efforts toward peace wouldn't be destroyed by those who profited from conflict. The nuclear disarmament treaty was succeeding. Global conflicts were decreasing. International cooperation was increasing. And somewhere above the clouds, a flight attendant with a secret past continued serving coffee while secretly serving peace. If this story inspired you, remember that flight attendants and other travel industry professionals often have incredible backgrounds and skills. They're trained to handle emergencies, speak multiple languages, and work in high-pressure situations, and they might be protecting you in ways you never realize. Have you ever been in a situation where your past experience suddenly became crucial in an unexpected way? Share your story in the comments below. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and remember, the next time you fly, your flight attendant might be a former teacher, military veteran, police officer, or diplomatic security specialist. Their diverse backgrounds make them even better at keeping you safe.